Hello, hello. Welcome again. Here we are. We are studying Revelation. This is Eschatos, I believe, session number 13. I only really started counting the sessions after we got into the book of Revelation. And so, but yeah, session 13. Here we go. Tonight, we're going to be handling some of chapter 6. I'm not putting a specific number of verses. Chapter 6 is an important chapter in Revelation. It kind of starts to give us some orientation into the next part of the book, which is very clearly future from the perspective of John. Some of the events may be really confusing at this point. We start to get into some more vision type material. And some of the beginnings of some of those difficult elements that you may not pick up on and really grasp and understand if you are not familiar with other parts of the book. So, chapter 6 is going to be an important one because we're going to use it as sort of a template for how we're going to study some of the future parts of the book. Some of the parts of the book we're going to encounter later. We're going to use this as sort of our training wheels in just kind of dealing with this type of literature. So we're going to start in chapter 6. We're going to look at one other passage in Scripture, which some of you probably could guess where we're going to go if you've been following on the study for a while. But we'll probably be in chapter 6 for, I'm going to guess, at least 3 weeks. Maybe. These will probably be a little bit shorter, though. So, yeah, maybe a little bit more palatable. So tonight we're going to take some really specific sections of chapter 6. And so there you go. Before we go, though, a couple of things. Housekeeping stuff having to do with the group we're going to do in the group message. And so if you're there and you're part of it, that's great. If you, for some reason, have stumbled upon this at a later date, none of that makes any difference to you because it's kind of more timely. For this upcoming month, I think it'd be really great for us to actually all meet. So we will use the message, the group message that we have to start to coordinate that. I think it'd be super fun. As we lead up to it and sort of get that planned, that meeting we'll have a meal. Any questions that people have had, it's the time to bring them, and we'll just spend some time together. And yeah, so it'll be good. Let's pray. Let's get started. So sorry for any mic issues here when I remove my hat out of respect for the Lord. So here we go. Heavenly Father God, we are thankful to be looking into your book. It is always a good time when we're in your word, Lord, because how could it not be to receive a message from outside of our space and time domain delivered to us, a word that is living, that is active. It is a good thing. It is a wonderful thing. And Lord, as we look into your word, I pray that we would be, Lord, anticipating that you will teach us something tonight, whether that something is just a new thing about you, a new part of your character that we hadn't considered for a long time, new material that we hadn't necessarily connected with other parts of our understanding, Lord, or just to be able to read your words that you've preserved for us. Lord, I pray that it would be a time for us to worship you, to understand your greatness better. Lord, I pray that we dig deep and discover the wonderful things that are in your word. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. There we go. There we go. Oh, tonight. So the beverage of choice tonight is actually, we're going a little bit different. So still sparkling Bubba water, but from Trader Joe's. Not a sponsor, but there you go. It's the cranberry clementine. Cranberry Clementine sounds like the name of some sort of fictional love interest in a poorly written novel. But anyway, it's going to be the flavors tonight. So, Revelation chapter 6. Here we go. So, I'm going to read part of this. We'll stop a couple of times. And yeah, so here we go. I'm reading out of the ESV. Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. Now I watched. So, again, sorry, I'll pause again. Just read two words. The I is John. So, this is him talking about what he's seeing. So, now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals. And I heard one of the four living creatures say, with a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. Verse 5. When he opened the third seal, I heard the living creature, it says the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Do not harm the oil and wine." Verse 7. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard a voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. Very uplifting passage. We're going to stop there in reading in chapter 6. But these four horses that come forward, they've often been described, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. As we've kind of seen here, that they're entities, these entities, whatever they are, we'll talk much more about that later on. But whatever these are whatever is going forward is pictured as riders on a horse. There's 4 different colors that are talked about here. They're descriptors of these horses. They talk about the riders, and the riders do something or have something, and so it's very much the horse and the rider are kind of seen as kind of a singular sort of entity, or of some kind, a one sort of like a package kind of deal. So when you talk about the white horse is descriptive of what's going on, almost descriptive of the rider as well. So these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, they're talked about in literature. They're people. It's one of the parts of Revelation that's been popularized. So you might hear people talk about the 4 horsemen. They've almost taken on their own personality. I'm sure there's a band called the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, or just the 4 Horsemen. That'd be okay too. That almost sounds like a barbershop quartet. Maybe not as ominous as we might think. But what you have here is these are the 4 creatures that are brought up. But the action, what is the action that summons these? Well, a couple of things happen. It happens with all 4 of these seals that we looked at. So the seal, remember there's a scroll. So if you are watching this one and you haven't gone through the other ones, I would say this might have piqued your interest, but go back and sort of at least catch up with the last couple of lessons before you go through this. In the last lesson we talked about, there's this scroll. Right? John goes to heaven. He sees this vision. He sees the throne room. We have this scroll that's there, and the scroll is there, and no one is worthy to open it. John weeps. He said, "Don't weep. The one who's worthy is coming." Right? And it's the Lion, the tribe of Judah. It's the Lamb that was slain. So clearly, this is Jesus. Jesus is worthy. The reason he's worthy, and then we went through all this in chapter 5, is because he died. So he was slain, so therefore he's worthy. And part of that had to do with the fact that he was a human being who came, a righteous human who died. So fulfilled all these different roles that his predecessors could not. The patriarchs could not. So he lived the life that Adam couldn't. Right? He resisted sin. And so because of that, and Hebrews talks about this too, and we'll bring that up at a later point. But Hebrews says that because of that, our high priest, Jesus, our high priest, he doesn't have to make any offerings for himself, right? So that the blood that was used, his blood was able to be used for others, and it's powerful enough. His sacrifice was effective enough to take care of our sins. So, because of that, Jesus, this lamb that was slain, can take hold of that scroll and can open it. And so imagine a scroll, right? We don't use scrolls a whole lot. We got books, and we don't. And I got, man, if you could see my office, I've got stacks and stacks of books all over the place. But you've got a book like this, and this is how we represent it, right? We you read one side and then you turn to the next. But with a scroll, you can have it can be as long as you want. It's on one big old piece of parchment, and it's either rolled, and that's what I think normally we think of, or it could just be folded. Maybe it's rolled and like kind of flat, so you can open up one part and kind of close it, so it makes it a little easier if it's a long scroll, right? It makes it better and doesn't roll up on you while you're reading. So a lot of these may have been flat, but if they're flat, then there's going to be a part that overlaps, and that's how you'll seal it. Well, you can seal it once, and then you can have the ends flare up. So maybe you do a couple of seals if this was a big book. What you could also have on here is seals. So we've talked about these seals. What are seals used for? What is a seal? Um, we don't really use them. I mean, if you have, you've probably used it for something extremely formal compared to your everyday life. So something like a graduation invitation that we fancy up, or a wedding invitation of some kind. I think that's pretty much it. Those are the major ceremonies that we have. We graduate from something, or we marry someone, in the ceremonial things around those events. We might have something like that, this more formal sort of thing. So if you have a seal that you use for your graduation, it may just be like your initial. Maybe it was the mascot of the school you went to. For weddings, it's probably like monogram. It's probably the last name, or both their last, whatever, right? It's usually something like that. Times past, what they would have is a seal that was made, and it was some sort of a signet, and often it was like a ring. So that signet represented the individual, or it represented the house, the family, and or a position, or something to that effect. And that ring would be used to make an imprint, and that's what they would do. Or maybe the ring was sort of like the ceremonial thing, but you actually had it with something else that you would stamp. But the ring is nice because it would mean you could make one really specific, unique one, and it could only be with the person who it's supposed to be with, right? So that's where you get some of these pictures, and it endured for a really long time, up until 1700s, 1800s, probably still common to do something like that. And I know that even just depending on the tradition and different things, the color of the wax that was used, you'd melt wax and kind of close it up and seal it, and then you'd use the signet, or you press it on there, you have something else. And if you did that, that would seal it like a seal should. It would seal it shut. And if it was broken, you knew that someone had read your correspondence. And so it could be that. It could also be used for something else official as well, as though it's sort of like, you know what? Actually, we have something similar. It's like a notary. Like a notary has an imprint that they'll use, and then that document then becomes official. There's a certain way that they'll look at it, the double check. They got a job to do, all these different things, and so then they will put an imprint in the paper. You have these embossing things. If you haven't had to have something notarized before, then I mean that's the official way to do it, and that's where you can have an agreement with someone else. And if you say, how do we make this an official thing, that's one way you can do that. You can make it official by having a notary make sure that the person signs and checks their ID and make sure it's them, and vice versa, and then boom, notarized, right? And that's basically saying that someone has looked through here and this is official. That's probably one of the closest things that we do today that carries the weight of what that signet might mean, right? So you've got the like, okay, graduation, it's not that big a deal if someone knows that I'm going to graduation or going to a wedding. But when you get to a notary, then all of a sudden that seal, that embossment means something. It means something very official. And what I want to kind of go into, and we're going to go into it in much more depth later on, the seal itself, we I think we look at at this chapter and we get focused on those other details and we forget that part of this is an official function. This is a function of whoever is worthy to open this. It's an official opening. It means something. It has weight to it in depth. In fact, such weight that when a seal is broken, what happens? There is the one of the living creatures, as though this has been practiced, as if we know what's going on. You break a seal, there's impact to that. Sort of that like that this official thing takes place. I know last time we were kind of I was kind of teasing a lot about what this scroll might be. And we'll get much more into that. One of the things that this scroll most likely represents, and it's probably more than just this, but it represents the authority, the worthiness for the one who breaks it, if that one is worthy to do this, to bring about a reckoning upon earth. And we've talked about this in times past, that it is the role of humans to have domain on earth. Human beings were created in the image of God. And because we were created in the image of God, and because we are supposed to be the, if you want to think of it this way, like the regent, we're the representative of God on earth. Human beings themselves bear the image of the one with all authority. Very much like the seal. Why does a human have authority on earth? Because we bear the image of God. Why is this document an official document? Because it bears the seal. It has been notarized. Why does Jesus have that authority? Not only is he worthy because of his death, but he's worthy because he was a human who died. And he's eternal because he's also God who died. All of these different aspects of who Jesus is play into this thought, this idea. And human beings are part of that fulfillment. So the fact that Jesus is human is really significant because it means that he has the authority to do that. Last time we talked about Matthew 28, Jesus declared that he has all authority in heaven and on earth. Right? So he would bear the authority in heaven, because he is the Son of God, because he is Yahweh. He's the second member of the Trinity. He is God. So he has the authority there, right? By coming and living the perfect life we could never live, by exhibiting and living and embodying righteousness and then dying as a human being, he's able to conquer death. It was the thing that was prescribed for for sin, right? Death is the wages of our sin. But because he conquered that, he now is able to have that authority on earth as well. And you can say that through the events of death and his resurrection, he also holds those keys to death as well, although we don't really talk about the grave as much. We're usually pretty much enamored with this concept of the redemption of Earth, redemption of humanity in general, and that plays into those who are dead. It plays into those who have gone on before. So, but all that to say, part of this has to do with the sealing. So the scroll is sealed, and and that's going to play into something a little bit later on too, as far as the seals. So don't forget about that, and I won't let you forget. We'll talk about some more. But Jesus opens here. We talked about four different seals, and you have four four different horses that are released. The first is a white horse. A white horse, a conqueror, is what's described here, right? And the rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. So he's this. It's hard to not see this representative as war, but the concept of conquer would also then bring in this idea of establishing continued dominance, right? Doesn't just roll in, wage war, and leave. There is something here in connection with that conquering um, a country, a nation, a people, an area would also usually tie in to this continued presence. And so that conquering, because otherwise we just say go to war, go to battle, kill. That's not it, right? Because there's got to be something different between the first horse and then the fourth horse, which is just death, right? So it's not just going and killing. That's not the point. The point is the conquering. That's what makes us different. If you'll notice here, we talked about this a few weeks ago, but the bow, the picture of the bow, right? That's here too. It says he was given a crown. So that's where we can kind of say, yes, this is a little bit more than just goes out and wages war to kill. This is a war to establish, right? To maintain. So that's the first one. The second rider. So second seal is broken. Second living creature. It's a bright red horse taking peace from the earth. So it's different to have a conqueror come in and maybe with an army go and do some stuff. What's happening in this one, in the second seal with the red horse, is peace is removed. So we have most of us who are probably studying together here, we have not really known not peace. We've only really known peace. The reason I say that is generally we aren't at war. There are places where it's more dangerous, right? But if you generally, right, and there are exceptions, but generally, if you want to avoid trouble, we know ways to avoid that kind of trouble. Um, there could be targeted violence from an individual or randomized violence on a very small scale. But what this is talking about is that semblance of peace that we have, that we generally have mostly in the West, and of course throughout the world. There's kind of a general understanding of peace in most places. There are obvious exceptions. That's removed. So I the picture that comes to mind with this, because we need to have kind of an idea. It's not like you live in a big city and then you could be caught in the crossfire between gangs. That's not what we're talking about. What's described here with the second seal is death. I'm sorry, well, death, but um, it's through the interaction with your neighbor. Okay, so this is the opposite of loving your neighbor. This is war with your neighbor. The okay in the summer of 2000. That's a long time ago now. 22 years ago. That's a long time. I was in Croatia. I had the opportunity to go to Croatia for a summer to work with the church there. I'll tell you what, I loved it. Croatia is amazing. If you ever have a chance to go, you should go. People super nice, great food, and the cities are beautiful, and it's pretty amazing. I'll be honest. It was great, and we went to work with a Baptist church there. And for them, they're Catholic. They're traditionally Catholic. Culturally, that's what they are. And so to be there and not be Catholic, they just called you Baptist. That's just how they kind of did it. It's what the terminology they use. But we went there and we were trying to see if people were interested in hearing the gospel. Um, and I was and for some of you may not be fully aware what happened. There was a war, there was Yugoslavia, and then there wasn't, and then there's a bunch of other countries there now. But I would just ask, like, what was it like? What because I've seen on TV and I know some of the details, but what was it really like to have a war like that, where it was? I mean, it was very much like in neighborhoods where people lived, and how it was described to me was before communism in Yugoslavia, you had these different regions and different countries and stuff, and they always kind of warred with each other. And somewhere in history, Croatians, Catholic, Serbians were Eastern Orthodox, and Bosnians were Muslim. And they just kind of lumped onto those or grabbed onto those identities, and you can kind of just lump the whole regions into those belief systems, those religions. And there was always tension and fighting and things like that. When communism came through, there was a dictator named Tito. Tito was able to bring about peace by just being a really, a dictator, a tyrant. But he wanted there to be peace between people. Like he wanted society to function. So he found ways to try to make people mix, and he was able to keep the peace through certain policies and things like that. And so everything was fine for a while. He really encouraged them to intermarry, thinking if they're all intermarried and their families are all whatever, then maybe we can just all be one country. Well, when Tito died, there was an took was it was shortly after Tito died. Um, Communism was falling apart other places, and what you had was all of a sudden, and the way it was described to me was it was almost like just one day you have this kind of unsettled, still kind of a peace. The very next day, like overnight, like everyone got a text message, and the text message just said war's on. And it was like the person that you rode the bus with every day to work for years, all of a sudden, and you'd have conversation, whatever, and you didn't go to each other's house for holidays, but you were friends, acquaintances. We all have these kind of relationships with people, right? Uh, all of a sudden, the next day, that person's trying to kill you because all of a sudden now it matters that you're Croatian and they're Bosnian. Like it matters all of a sudden one day. And it was like one day, it was just everyone was against each other, and everyone backed up into their identities again, and just got weapons and started fighting. And so then enough Serbians would get together and go to this neighborhood and just go through, and they knew who the Croatians were, and they'd go attack them. And all the Bosnians would do the same in the other neighborhoods, and it was just mass chaos. And there's certain regions where it was obviously in the region of Croatia there was more Croatians, but they had all mixed over the generation. Um, and so it's just like the next day, it's just all of a sudden there's just not peace. There's not peace with your neighbor. You have to go and find someone else to align with, and then of course the idea is sort of like the temptation is they're all against me, and I'm with the people who are we're all for each other. So very easily you fall into the mentality of I'm against all of them, even if you didn't really care to fight. And then of course they start just grabbing men to be in the army. And so this all of a sudden it's just neighbor against neighbor. You can't trust anybody. You have to go into your different groups, and all of a sudden it's like pieces removed just overnight. And from the description that we get here, it's probably going to get you worse because you won't have those identities that way to be easily be like, well, we're all Croatian, so we're all okay. Like you won't know possibly, right? So that always comes to mind when I read through this portion here. That's the second one. Third one. The third writer is black. He has it says he has scales, right? And what we're seeing here is famine, and what's possibly described as a um, either food shortages or economic breakdown to the point where it's difficult for people to get food, to buy food, whatever. But it shows the scales, and it's talk about denarii, and a denarii is it's a whole day's wage. And so in here it describes, a what does it say? A quart of wheat for a whole day's wage. Just to use round numbers, what if you made $100 a day? $100, a whole day's wage for 1 quart of wheat? That's insane. How are you going to afford anything? So the idea is scarcity and possibly economic breakdown, or all of it all at once. And it's interesting where we can give up some luxuries and other things, but what it describes here is that very basic things you can't buy. And then it mentions in verse 6, but don't harm the oil and the wine. So luxuries will apparently be easier to find than necessities. It's a very topsy turvy sort of thing, and so that's the description there. Verse 7 talks about the fourth, or it opens up the section for the fourth writer. And that seems to be the scary one. A pale horse. There's maybe kind of like a greenish sort of thing. And it just says that pale, that idea, the words in Greek kind of lean towards that like pale green, almost like sickly kind of color. It said its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. This is the only horse with a trailer, apparently, some sort of a cart, or maybe it's just this big old beast of Hades. This, as your destination, is following after him in a figurative way. It says they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword and with famine and with pestilence and beasts, wild beasts. But those are the four things that are mentioned: sword, famine, pestilence, beast. These are very intense ways to see death for a quarter of the earth. So if it was today, we're getting close to what, 8 billion? So I'm using big numbers because it's easier. 8 billion, quarter, 2 billion people dead. That is insane. So these are the four. And again, we're gonna continue to talk about that. What I want to do is go turn over to Matthew 24, our old standard. This is Jesus. So you ever have those times where you're like, oh man, if I could go back in time, meet Jesus, I would ask him, fill in the blank. I bet you a lot of us might ask questions in relation to this. What's it going to be like? What do I do? What's going to happen? After we got through some of the weird ones, like why a platypus? Why does everything taste like chicken? Like those kinds of questions. Once we get through those, what about the end? And that's what his disciples asked him. Hey, what's going to happen in the end? It was prompted by a discussion they were having, but there's a lot of questions you can ask Jesus. That's definitely one I would. So if you go to Matthew 24, sat on the Mount of Olives, verse 3. Disciples came to him privately, says, tell us what these things will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age. There's that phrase again. We talked about it before. The end of the age. Jesus answered, thankfully, said, see that no one leads you astray. And I've said it before. I will say it again and continue to say it. I will say it until everyone is sick of me saying it. This is the primary thing for us to be watching out for. Do not be deceived. Take care that you're not deceived, which means we must be informed. We must be discerning. We must be evaluating, which hopefully we are learning to do in a better way. Every day, every week, every month, we're smarter. We're not just with information, but with discernment. We're able to evaluate things better, eat the meat and spit the bones a lot better. Don't be deceived, Jesus says. See to it that no one leads you astray, for many will come into my name saying, I am the Christ. They will lead many astray. They will, and there will be wars and rumors of wars. See to it that you're not alarmed, for this must take place. But it's not the end yet. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there'll be famine and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of birth pains. This section here, verses 3 through 8. If we walk through this, and of course, Jesus says, don't be deceived. Okay? See to it no one leads you astray. Verse 5 through 8. I know I said 3 through 8. 5 through 8. 5 through 8 corresponds really closely with what we just read in those four seals. Listen again. Many will come into my name saying, I am the Christ, and will lead many astray. This most likely corresponds to the first horse, to that white horse who goes a conquering. Think of it this way. In the time of the Gospels, when Jesus was on earth, that was the perspective that his disciples and so many others had of the Messiah. The Messiah is going to come, kick some Roman butt, and we're going to get the kingdom back. That was the idea. The concept was the Messiah is going to come, and he's going to wreck shop, and we are going to end up with our kingdom again. And so it would make sense that one who comes saying that I'm the Christ, I'm the Messiah, would fulfill some of those things. And in fact, for us, that's what we're actually waiting for Jesus to do. Show up, fix it. He's going to conquer it. He's going to make it better, right? And so Jesus says there are many who are going to come by name. This sounds like the white rider or the rider of the white horse. I'll be more specific. It says that many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and will lead many astray. Okay. Second one, you hear of wars and rumors of wars. See to it you're not alarmed, for this must take place. This again still sounds like that first rider, right? That second rider is dealing with taking peace from the earth, which sounds like what we have here in verse 7. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. That sounds a lot like kind of the first rider and the second rider. And see to it you're not alarmed. Oh, sorry, that was verse 6. I guess we are supposed to be alarmed. Verse 7, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines. That's where we get this black horse. That rider comes with the scales. So there'll be famines. And then it says earthquakes in various places. That we haven't gotten to yet. It's later on in chapter 6. But these are the beginning of birth pains. Okay, so what Jesus describes here are those four horsemen. Remember, that fourth one is just death. Death is sort of like part of that inner layer. But when we're reading in Revelation, that is on the earth. When we look at it here in Matthew 24, the perspective is Jesus is answering his disciples who are, of course, his. They are they're his followers. They would have the promises that God has. So we may not experience the same that the rest of the world does during this time because it's sort of not fair. It's sort of like you have a Christian um, who's on a sports team. It's kind of not fair if they pray, right? If no one else prays. Is that unfair advantage? Always thought about that. I know it's a silly example, but going into these times, it's like we have an unfair advantage because we actually have the ear of the one who promises us daily bread, promises to clothe us, promises to care for us and to love us, and promises that we'll be a family, that we'll be his children, which means we have inherently people that we will connect with and be able to live and to survive. And so in all these different things, does it mean that calamity is not going to come to Christians? No, that's actually not what Jesus is saying here. But that idea that like we're all going to die, we don't have that same mentality as the world does. That's why Jesus is preparing his disciples. Hey, I want you to understand what's coming. When calamity comes, Jesus will have his people deployed where they need to be. Because God's going to use us. Our King is going to use us during these difficult times that'll be coming on the earth. And I say that because times like these come upon the earth all the time. Different regions will experience one or two or all of these all at once. And God will deploy his saints. He will put his people there to live through that time. Why? To punish them? No, so they can bring light to the others who are experiencing this. The whole point is God allows some of these calamities to take place so that people kind of start to take seriously the things that are serious. They start to think about life and death because life and death all of a sudden becomes a daily thought. I could die today. Better make sure I'm okay. How many of us are just, and when I say us, how many people in our neighborhoods, in our country, in our state, whatever you want to designate that as, how many they don't think about dying hardly ever? Something has to remind them, oh yeah, I'm going to die. It's like an uncommon thought for a lot of people. And even for some people who do think about it and they're obsessed with it, it's not actually reality. It's like a thing they can pick up and they can examine and look at, right? And I'm not minimizing people who are suicidal or suicidal constantly. That really does take place. But it's not a daily reality like, hey, I could just be killed or I could starve. It's different when it's something that you're looking at in a philosophical manner, looking at death or thinking about death, versus death could come at any moment and any time. It's a very unsettling thing in that way. I'm not minimizing one or the other, but what I'm saying is that in light of all of these different things that are going on, God will deploy those who are his to those places because remember, like we talked about last week, the ultimate goal is that people in all these different nations would become disciples of Jesus. That's the point. And so God will deploy his people where they need to be in order to fulfill that role, even in dark times like this. So when we look at Matthew 24, we look at what Jesus is promising is going to happen, and we look at Revelation chapter 6, there's an obvious correspondence there, but it also means there's an inherent responsibility. We need to not be deceived so we can be the ones that offer help. We can't be caught up in the current, the current of this river of life culture that we're in of this. We can't be caught in the current and also help people at the same time. We have to live discerning lives so that we are not caught in the same cultural eddies that everyone is in. we instead can offer something that they aren't going to find anywhere else, an actual solution to the problem. Whether that problem is understanding life and death, whether it's um, being able to be provided for, like food or clothing, because we all take care of each other. So, yeah, if we have some extra, we can help other people. Um, and that thought of, wow, someone has extra, that's because we all are taking care of each other, right? The point is this: as we read through some of these things, the natural temptation is for us to be scared. Instead, what we should be doing is looking and thinking, I've been told ahead of time what is going to be happening. And so I can be as prepared as I can be for some of these things. And some of that preparedness is not necessarily material, it's internal. Understanding what might be happening, understanding what's going on, that type of thing, right? I mean, be prepared so that I can continue to live fulfilling the mission that Jesus gave all the way to the end. Because do you know what we're waiting on? We're waiting for the number of the Gentiles to be fulfilled. We're waiting until Jesus says, all right, everyone is here. We're going to finish this. And so when God puts us different places, we can have a mentality of, why me? Why am I here? Why am I experiencing this? I don't know if anyone has thought this, but has anyone thought, like, why could I have been born in the 70s where we didn't have so many of these things to worry about? They had it awesome. Well, every generation kind of has things that aren't awesome that they're dealing with. And it's not up to us to lament being born one time or another, because it's the Lord who deploys us and sends us. And so we may not experience the seals that we're talking about. Maybe not to maybe to a little a little extent, maybe to a large extent. Who knows? Maybe we're going to go through all of that. Whatever that looks like, the Lord has put you here. He's told you ahead of time so that we can know and understand what's happening, so we can be of benefit to others. We can serve others with that knowledge, with that understanding. Here's what I love for everyone to do this week. Let's read Matthew 24 and Matthew 25, both those chapters. We'll touch on it a little bit again next week, and then we will continue on in chapter 6 of Revelation to talk about these seals that are being opened. There are 7 seals. We've talked about 4 of them, and we'll kind of talk more about those seals, and we'll kind of move into maybe the rest of those. But again, we're going to be in that chapter for a couple more sessions, because it's going to be a nice example for us to have walked through. So that's our message for tonight. Thanks so much for studying with me, and pray that you are all ready to live tomorrow, the next day, to understand what the Lord has for you to do and how to serve. Love you all. Talk again soon. Peace.